Okay, so now we're going to take a look at the last piece of the puzzle is working with two objects that exist in world space and using the copy location constraint where we can switch between local space and world space between them. How is that going to work? So here I'm just going to zoom out and click on this object. I'm only clicking on this object because it just says cube. Now do Control I to invert the selection, do X and delete. Click on this object, do Alt R G S, do Shift Z to place the 3D cursor in the center. I'll go ahead and zoom out a bit. Now we're going to do Shift D to duplicate this object, right click to cancel, and of course press the S key to scale so we don't have to deal with overlapping objects. Go ahead and zoom out. Now we're going to use this as the target object, and this is going to be the owner object. Let's go ahead and go to the Constraints tab, and here we're going to do Copy Location and go ahead and click on this object. Now we already know how world space and world space works. Very simple concept. So the first thing that I want you to do is switch both of these to local space and local space. So the first question is, why would we bother even doing this, right? Why would we bother using two objects that are in world space and switch them to local space? Both of them, right? Because if you click on this object and press the R key to rotate, now press the Control key down, point the X up over here. Notice that if you click on this object to move along its X, this object will move along its X in this direction. So you could look at this and say, well, that's kind of pointless to do, right? Because why don't we just create parent-child relationships and just rotate the parent? Because then we can point to this object in any direction we want. Sure, you can do that, but the point of this lesson is to understand at a deeper level how world space and local space concepts work in a Blender. So the first thing over here that you will notice that over here when we are evaluating both objects in local space and local space, they're obviously going to behave the same exact way that you've seen in the previous lessons. Meaning that if we click on this object and press the R key, you'll notice that it's going to start to move this object, and you know exactly why it's doing it, right? So here we're going to expose first its local coordinate system that we know that Blender is simply going to take the Z and X axis and make that the local coordinate system. And it's obviously going to be at the center of the grid. Same exact thing is going to happen for this object. So let's take a look at this object first. So let's just do Shift A, and here we're going to add arrows and press the S key to just scale it where the X comes around here. Now, of course, we're going to go over here to copy rotation, and all we have to do is copy the rotation of this. Okay, now when we click on this object, press the R key, you can see that how it's a local coordinate system is actually rotating. This is because this object is stationary, right? And this object is moving is because it's Blender's aligning this object to its local coordinate system. So let's expose this object's local coordinate system in the same way. Just do Shift A, and over here we're just going to do arrows, and here I'm just going to press the S key and scale this a bit larger than the other one so we can see the difference. Of course, over here we're going to do copy rotation and click on this, right? So now you can see that over here when we rotate this, right, how these two Z's are aligning, it's aligning them over here, right? So if we press the R key and do the same thing that we did before over here, right, you'll notice that over here when we go to the grease pencil and click on align, if we draw a line on its x-axis and draw a line from its Z, a perpendicular line, we can see how this is. So if we examine this object, it's the same thing on its x-axis over here and Z, right? It's the same concept. Now, when you click on this object, you can even rotate it, and you can see that that offset is always going to be kept, right? So that's how this idea works. So I'm just going to remove this. So make sure that you understand what's going on over here, okay? Now, what we're going to do is actually, first let's go ahead and save this as a new file. We're going to do File, Save As, and let's save this as a bone concepts for .blend. Okay, so what we want to do is actually first take a look at this object. Press the G key and just move it down. What we're going to do is actually expose its local axis, right? Because right now the Z and the X are really working like it's a local coordinate system. But we want to see the local axis, meaning that the axis that used to be the Z and the X. And you know how that's going to work, right? That basically means that the global coordinate system, the X and the Z, are going to become its local. So they're going to be static. So to see this, what I want you to do is do Shift S and do cursor to selected on this object. Just do Shift A, and here we're going to do single arrow and press the S key to scale this. Of course, we're going to go to the copy location and go ahead, just copy the location of this object. Now on this object here, you can see that we've actually have the numbers changed. So I'm just going to do Alt G to make sure that they are 0. Now we can just do Shift D to duplicate it, right click to cancel, click on offset, press the R key to rotate, type in 90 and enter. Okay, and that's it. So now when we click on this object and move it, we'll always see its local axis, which is really representing what has become of the global axis that we're seeing on the 3D grid. So these are never going to budge. See, when we rotate it, they will always stay here. We're doing this so we can see what's going on. So we have to do the same thing on this. Okay, so we're going to do Shift S and do cursor to selected. Now we're going to do Shift A and add a single arrow. Press the S key to scale it quite a bit. And of course, we're going to do copy location first. Go ahead and copy the location of this. Again, in the same way, we're going to first fix this. We're going to do Alt G to reset the location. This allows us to do Shift D to duplicate it, right click to cancel, click on offset, press the R key and type in 90 and just type in enter. Now the issue here is that we need to make these two guys rotate correctly so they match how the local axis is being represented on this object. So how do we do this? So let's go ahead and first collapse this on both of these. We don't actually have to worry about this. Okay, now remember, all these objects that we're dealing with here are in world space. Okay, so let's click on this one first. So here we're going to do copy the rotation of this object first, right? And then over here, we're going to do copy rotation again and copy the rotation of this object. Now, as you already know, we have to definitely click on offset. And of course, we have to do invert because you've already seen that in the previous lessons, why we have to do it, right? It has to match the local and the local axis, and basically it's a local coordinate system, z-axis. So over here, we're going to do the same thing. Now remember, on this one, we actually had clicked on offset. So this means that when we do copy rotation, same way, click this one. We're going to do invert and offset. We have to do that. Now we're going to do copy rotation again. Click on this and get this guy and do offset. Okay, so now let's take a look at how this is working. So if we click on this object and press the R key, this will rotate. Now, when we click on its x-axis, you'll notice that this is now pointing towards how this object is moving along the x. Right? This is again basically being turned into a local axis. That's all that's going on over here. Now when we do Z, this will go Z. See over here? That's all that's going on. So we can rotate this any way that we want, and we can even click on this and rotate this, and it will always work. This is going in this direction, and this is going in this direction. Now let's go ahead and do File and Save. Okay, so now what we're going to do is go ahead and click on this object, and we're going to switch this to world space. Okay, so this means that we're looking at the target object in world space. So when we do that, we already know that, okay, so if this object is going to be evaluated in world space, when we move this object along the x-axis, this object will move along its local x-axis. Okay, now when we move this object along its global z-axis, then this object is going to move along its global z-axis. Now we have to take care of these arrows. So in this case, we just have to remove the invert, right? Because we only use the invert when we are evaluating this object which exists in world space when we're looking at it in local space. So if you go ahead and click this and just remove the invert and invert, now you'll see that when we click on this object and actually move along its local z, you'll see that how this arrow is showing that how it's moving along its local z and local x. That's it. So you can click on this and press the R key and rotate it anywhere that you want. And you'll see that it will always work, right? You can do anything that you want over here. So when we do Z, it will move along the Z and X, right? So look at this object, how we're moving this. And of course, when we do X, it will just move along its X and move along the Z. I'm just going to press the R key to rotate this back. Now the last thing here we're going to do is simply go back to local and switch this to world. Now when we do local, we already know that, okay, well, if you're going to go back to local, then when we look at these arrows, we have to click the invert back and click on the invert back, right? Now here's the thing, because we are evaluating this guy in world space, so this cube over here that we're looking at actually does not count, right? Because it's just world space, right? So we need to shut that off. In the same way, we have to also shut this off, because now we're just talking about world space. So everything needs to basically go back to normal is what I'm saying here, right? And that's it. Now remember, you have to keep this on invert is because we're still looking at this object in local space. So when we press the R key to rotate, you'll see that how this works. Okay, so this again is a local, right? So local means that this z-axis is become its local coordinate system. So when we click on z over here, this is going to move along this global z. Now when we click on x over here, this is going to move along the global x. Now when we click over here on the x, which is really now acting like its local axis over here, you'll notice that over here, this is where the arrow is pointing. And now when we click on z, you'll notice that that's where the arrow is pointing for the z. So again, like I said, I advise you to spend a bit more time in understanding what I'm showing you here when it has to do with world space and local space. You just have to repeat these exercises a dozen times until you start to see a pattern where you can start to visualize these concepts. Now here, what we're going to do is simply just save this file. Okay, so I'll see you in the next lesson. Thank you.